All right, we're back with another subscriber video, and we're going to do a what is a general question, but probably get into some specifics. And the question generally is, why do we have an absolute conjugate strategy? Like, why are we creating and have up to this point created a an absolute version of the conjugate strategy?
Okay, yeah. So there's a lecture we did a while back. I'll probably link it to this that kind of shows the roots of the absolute conjugate system, how it emerged out of Russia, Soviet Union, then essentially was able to link up over here in the West where we're located at via Louis Simmons, Westside Barbell. And so essentially it depends, right? Like we've written about this, but the conjugate system has a lot of different definitions. So it's a lot of things to a lot of different people,
Hmm.
right? And so realistically, yeah, let's kind of unpack this. So the conjugate system is essentially the exact opposite of linear-based periodization.
Hmm.
Okay, so let's kind of put that onto the table. So what is linear-based periodization? Linear-based periodization would be like, let's use our four fundamental elements, and let's say that, hey, this first 4 week block, we're going to train for joint function. And then the next 4 week block, we're going to train for absolute strength, and we're going to drop joint function. And then
Hmm.
the next one, we're going to train for reactive strength, and then drop that one.
So you
Okay.
have four phases of treatment, and during each phase, you're only targeting one behavioral quality.
Yeah, I mean that's what linear-based periodization is. I know, look, I know there's people that believe in it. I'm not one of them. I know you're not either, right? I mean, it just doesn't, there's no logic that supports that you can take linear based strategies and apply them to nonlinear systems with
Hmm.
success, with successful outcomes over time,
Hmm.
right? In the very untrained, it works. So like that's where they kind of live. Like, oh, but like look, like this happened, right? And it's like, yeah, okay, but like, that's so essentially a conjugate system. What a conjugate system says is like, listen, like we have to train for multiple things at once. So like any kind of like thought process that goes with linear based periodization is immediately out the window. The two
Hmm.
systems can't technically exist.
Yeah, they can't exist together simultaneously.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. Okay, and part of the problem that people run into, right? Like when we came up with point B, like the reason why we came up for point B is because like that's what we know that every athlete needs to train every week. Like
Yes.
that's
Yeah, definitely.
like those are the four fundamental elements of high performance, not low performance, right? Like those are the four fundamental elements of high performance, right? And there's sub elements within those elements,
Certainly.
right? You know what I mean? So like in reactive strength, there like a sub element of that, is going to be, the bottom up connective tissue, the top down nervous system. So
Hmm.
you can't untangle these feedback loops.
Correct.
Like, right? Okay, but essentially if we say, okay, well listen, like we need these four fundamental elements because we know that in the athletes we work with that are missing, let's say, reactive strength, right? That like they like it doesn't matter if you have the other three. Like if you don't have that, like you're not at the level of competition.
Correct.
Okay. And so all prior conjugate systems are essentially functioned at the external level, what we would say the level of competition. So if you look at the Russian sequencing system, which is essentially the conjugate system, that was designed to reverse engineer for sport. So everything was reverse engineering it for sport, whether that was track and field. Like it doesn't matter the athletes. You could have been an Olympic weightlifter, hockey, it doesn't matter. Like they kind of reverse engineered that, right? And so they were trying to get to the sport. Okay, so they were everything, the only feedback loop was really the level of competition,
Hmm.
right? And then Ververscansky writes in Special Strengths Development for All Sports. He talks about this concept of like raising the working effect, and that's where you start to see them talk about an internal environment, right? And then the Soviet Union collapses, and so that is what it is, right?
Hmm.
And so then what ends up happening is Louis Simmons essentially creates a conjugate system that that is specifically for an athlete, and that athlete is the power lifter. Okay. Okay. Because, and so his point B was for the lifts. So if you
Correct.
look at everything, everything is about the lifts. Okay. If you get to here at these levels, then you can do this because same thing. It's all a focus at the level of competition. Okay. And and even though he really moved the ball and progressed it and like proved a lot of things that a lot of linear based people thought couldn't be the case,
Hmm.
right? Like he proved that like you could train for absolute strength and speed strength within the same week. Okay, so just that in and of itself, like why would, if you're doing linear based periodization, if you can do that, why would you do one block and then the other block? Because like these are dynamic capacities, let's say, that as soon as you start to stop stimulating one, it goes down and they feed into each other. Once again, these feedback loops are all entangled. So like you
Sure.
can't, like if we're going to pull even for joint function, we're pulling from the neural net of absolute strength. So they're all entangled. You have
Certainly.
to be right. Okay, so then what ended up happening was point B was the first time that it was like, listen, this is a conjugate system that is specific for the internal, like that the optimal physical state that an athlete has to be at to be able to succeed at the level of competition. And it's not there, right? And if you technically really look at it through the lens of stagnation, I had this conversation with Shane Sweat like a while ago, and it's funny. I was asking him, I was like, hey, like what other subject, like give me some resources on the conjugate system. It's like there isn't any anymore, right? So essentially, like this thing is just stagnating to you're just seeing in my opinion, you're just seeing people recycle what Louis Simmons knew back in like the 1990s.
Right. So what you're saying is there has been no progression of the strategy
Correct.
and its applicability to anything outside of the sport of powerlifting.
For sure. Yeah, for sure. And it's weird because then you have like specific cases, like let's say like an NFL lineman. Well, an NFL lineman can use like the West Side system, right? But the problem is they're only developing the neurology. Like Louis even says it himself, like this West Side system is like you'll know how strong you are and how fast you are. He doesn't say anything about joint function. He doesn't say
Hmm.
anything about connective tissue.
Hmm. Hmm.
Those aren't like those are his own words. Like he's literally told you, listen, you're gonna know the two components over here, and then that's where we started to add in these other components where it's like, well, listen, a power lifter is moving a barbell. They're not moving themselves through space. So they're moving
Sure.
a barbell through space and time, right? When you're in the NFL, like you have to move. So joint function becomes an issue, right?
Sure.
There's no
Certainly.
gear like actually, NFL does put gear on, right? They got elbow sleeves and different stuff like this, right? But like you have to build that actual tissue. So there's no system that is currently out there that does this. And that's the reason why there needs to be like anything else, like things need to evolve. And as they evolve, if you're dealing with a nonlinear system, it's going to get more complex. And so this is another layer of complexity. It's like if you know how to train for speed strength and absolute strength, then you need to learn how to train for joint function and reactive strength.
Yeah.
If you know how to train for joint function, you need to learn how to train for reactive strength. If you need to, and then you got to figure out how to train for absolute strength and speed strength. You have to be able to do it all at the same time. Like we joke around about it. You're the one that came up with it. But it's like, are we talking about low performance or high performance? Because if we're talking about high performance, you're
Right.
training for all four of them at once. Like,
Certainly. Certainly.
like you can give us all the excuses you want. Well, Dr. Shivers, they have a dysfunctional joint and they don't have reactive strength. Yeah, listen, you're gonna have to figure out a way to train for both of them at the same time. It's
While they continue to do their sport.
correct.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of funny, like getting all of this feedback. It's like I think the main thing to state is like we know that athletes are not at point B. That's what we've been writing about for like
Certainly.
3 years, right?
Certainly. Yeah.
Right. So it's not new. It's not new information, and that's not the question to ask. Like the question is, okay, they're not at point B. What do you need to do today to start moving them forward to point B? Install that treatment, install that training, And then as soon as that's installed, you're looking to install the next. And remember, it's called a conjugate sequencing system. So the sequencing of how you do it is important.
Hmm.
A lot of people forget about that. Like it's how you sequence it, right? Like Mel Siff discussed that. If you look at it from like a 3 week perspective, right? Like once you do one training session, that creates acute training effects. And let's say you have acute training effects over a week. Well, then, when you start to stack weeks on top of that, now you're getting cumulative training effects, and those are progressively more stimulating and more propagating to point B. And that's the
Hmm.
beauty of a conjugate sequencing system.
Hmm.
And the other thing is too, with the maxims of strength and the ISM, we have the ability to really modulate and control intensity so that it's at the level that we need it to be, which is either going to be stimulating or retaining. It's one or the two.
Hmm. 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 So, yeah, I mean, I could listen to you talk about that for a long time. Maybe, maybe because I think it's really cool. Maybe go into a little bit more detail about the sequencing.
Yeah, okay. So the sequencing, yeah, this is where it becomes fun.
So hold on.
Mm.
Let me just say, like, before you and I met, I don't know, whatever it was, 8, 9 years ago, uh, and like I'm a clinician, right? I'm not a strength coach. I'm a clinician, so I come from a very clinical background, but a clinical background in high performance. So obviously see all this stuff and so on and so forth. But I remember whenever it was 6 years ago, 7 years ago, when you were kind of giving me all of this information, you're like, because I obviously we had met, and I'm like, if people don't know, the first time we met was at a seminar, and you were wearing a West Side shirt, and I was like, "Do you know Louis? Remember that?"
Yeah, it was that ran phones.
That was yeah. Because I was a Louis follower on YouTube because he was just so entertaining to me, and I was like, man, this guy really knows his shit about training. Like, I'm not a power lifter, obviously, but like just hearing him like discuss these things, and it would all his voice, man, it was just man, I was like just lie in bed and watch his YouTube videos on my phone. Uh, where was I going with this? But when you started describing to me, hey, like, and we started getting into detail about like the West Side system, I was like, that just sounds like clinical management.
Hmm.
Like clinical management, you can't target one thing at a time. Otherwise, clients will be like, you're not getting me better. I'm going to go somewhere else. You know what I'm
Hmm.
saying?
Hmm.
So, and then I started obviously reading and studying and learning the strategy. Um, Anyway, that was a like a sort of tangent, but go into the sequencing side of this.
Yeah, so that's how Conjugate in the Clinic came about.
For sure. I didn't mention that, but like yes.
Right, because essentially you're doing the same thing in the clinic, just nobody has technically said that to this point yet. And that's why we were like, hey, there's a whole conjugate in the clinic and technically, like when you're talking about high performance, there's different levels, right? And so all the levels of an organization or like an athlete's team need to be essentially have feedback loops. That's something that, I think Brett's talked about before,
Hmm.
right? Where he's at, and so I won't discuss that too much because that's probably a topic that he'll be able to articulate much better than me. But yeah, so I mean, if you look at it, right, because it's called like the Russian coupled system, right? And so how you sequence things really matters, right? Like if you look at this, like one of the things about Louis in the training at Westside, right? Like it's interesting because that's a true absolute strength sport in the sport of powerlifting. The CNS is always pretty much trained first. Sometimes there'll be like a little bit of like sled drags and like repeated efforts work to a degree, but like the goal was always to like push the nervous system as hard as you can to a large degree, right? There's
Hmm.
nuances to all this stuff, but if you get any of the templates, it's like, okay, today's a max effort day. Okay, your first thing that you're going to do is the max effort blocks, and then it goes into different types of accessory lifts. Well, why is it an accessory lift? Well, we don't use accessory lifts. Why don't we use accessory lifts? Because we don't care about accessory lifts. You see what I'm saying? They're using accessory lifts. Like we're thinking about accessory tissues. Okay, it's a
Right.
completely different concept. Okay,
Right.
they're doing accessory lifts because once again, their point B is a lift. It's not
Sure.
like an actual state of an actual internal organism, right? And
Right.
so yeah, so what starts to become fun, right, is because there's standards to everything, right? So once you start to reach those standards and you're actually at point B, this is where the system becomes super, super fun. Because if you have a neurological network of absolute strength, right, and you don't have to technically build anymore, you can start to do, max effort and dynamic effort within the same day. There's no rule that says you can't do that, right? And
Hmm.
and if you're having a joint issue, or let's say that you want to augment specific joint behaviors, then realistically you should probably sequence it so that it's joint function first and then goes into the neurology. Or you just use one of our heuristics and you start to do cars. Maybe you start to do level two, very specific level two car or some sort of capsular car in conjunction with the neurology, right? And the sequencing of that creates cumulative effects. So if we take that and you start to look, right, like that was the thing that we scaling the joint with the nervous system. Okay, if you want to, like strict hard linear based periodization, when you really start to like have conversations with these individuals, right, and you go, oh well, like you're doing like joint stuff at the same time that you're doing you're doing joint function stuff at the same time you're building the nervous system, right? Like even they can't really stick to pure linear based periodization because it doesn't work, right?
Hmm.
And then they just kind of like justify it in their mind, right? But yeah, so that's where you can start to sequence it, right? We talk about neurological durability. There's another one. Well, if the nervous system has to be able to output at levels when the nervous system doesn't want to do it, then guess what? You're going to be doing a lot of work before they start to do their durability work. And you have to sequence the training so that they're doing that in a fatigued state. And that's one of the reasons why we say that there's so much creativity involved in being able to sequence this way, that it's completely endless. And that's the reason why if your athletes are stagnating or accommodating, it's really probably on you in the way that maybe you're sequencing stuff. Because I mean, the nervous system knows, like
Sure.
like so yeah. I mean, that's kind of so. So that's the reason why we have an absolute conjugate strategy, because essentially we're the only ones that's saying like, hey, like everybody's kind of reverse engineering stuff for the level of competition. All we're saying is we want to use that strategy to get these four fundamental elements so that when they get to the level of competition and they're just practicing, the skill coach can teach them that, right? And
Sure.
then and then that's what gets true transfer of training effects, right? And that we're not really functioning at the level of competition. Not saying we don't use it as a feedback, but like, obviously that's one of the feedback loops that we create point B with. But yeah, so that's kind of where we're at.
That's great. Perfect.